Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. I'm your host, AP Strange. This is my show, and today's show is brought to you by LED lit zodiac signs. If somebody asked you what your sign is, we no longer need the neon ones, the old-fashioned neon zodiac signs. You can use these LEDs, which last a hell of a lot longer and they're more energy efficient. So if there's a sign that you'd like, consult your astrological chart, and you can pick them in sun yellow or moon blue. They come in all kinds of colors, and they even change colors. So check out Zodiac Light Up LED signs today. And for the show today, we have an astrologer on here, and he's a very interesting person because he's somebody that I actually know from real life, IRL, as the kids say these days. Um, as the kids said 15 years ago and probably don't say these days. uh, Andrew B. Watt. He has the website Wanderings in the Labyrinth at andrewbwatt.com, and it's an amazing website. If you're into astrology at all, it is a joy to read because where I knew Andrew from was poetry. We were both poets at the same time in the same place, and it's wild, like years later, to come across the intensive astrological stuff that he's done online, plus the poetry is worked into it, which we'll all get into. He's also a teacher, a public speaker, a teacher of public speaking, I understand, right? Do you do that as well?
That's
Yeah,
true, yes.
yeah.
Among other things.
All right. Well, and an author of several books. So, welcome to the show, Andrew. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, and we were kind of discussing beforehand. It's probably been about 20 years since we last saw each other in person. So,
Yeah,
perhaps, yeah,
I don't know how much you want me to say about this, but uh we both sort of were on the edges of a fairly large city, and it happened to be that they had poetry nights and a fairly active poetry scene. You could go to a poetry reading pretty much any night of the week. And
yeah,
we just happened to pick the same night, and we were in the same spaces for 5 or 6 years going to
yeah,
the same poetry nights.
yeah. Yeah, and it was wild for me because, like I said prior to recording, I was listening to What Magic Is This podcast with Douglas Batchelor, who I had on the show at one point. Listeners can go find that. That was pretty early on. But then I see that Andrew Watt is the guest on there, and I'm thinking that can't be the same Andrew Watt, right? And I listen, and I'm like, no, that's Andrew Watt. And I'm like,
Yeah,
that is so cool.
it's the same guy.
And I was, we were Facebook friends too, so I went and looked, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's all his writings on astrology. So it's the stars aligned for us to connect, I guess, in that way.
You know, it's funny that you should bring that up because, yes, in fact, the stars did align. I have
Hmm.
been stuck in this place around my career as an astrologer and my reputation where I have not been called upon for, being on podcasts or getting much in the way of clientele. And there has been this blockage in the form of what's known as the South Node passing through my 10th house, which is code for terrible shit happening in your career life.
Oh boy.
And the day that the South Node moved um out of my 10th house and into my ninth was basically the day that you started making noises about having me on the show.
Oh wow. Yeah, see, it's stuff like that is amazing to me because when you're really into the nitty-gritty of it, there's a specificity that's kind of uncanny with what the stars have to say about what's going on with very specific aspects of your life.
It is pretty weird sometimes and a little bit strange and hard to quantify, but it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, I kind of wanted to ask you, starting out here, like, I guess I could ask which came first between writing and astrology, but where did your interest in astrology begin? It seems like you've been at it for a long time, but it's only been more recent years that you've dedicated a lot of public time to it.
I started working as a professional astrologer in 2017, and I realized, as we were discussing beforehand, that the only way to get any attention on your writing these days is to figure out some way of getting eyeballs on your Instagram feed or your YouTube channel or your Facebook page or what have you. And so I started writing an astrology column in 2019. But before that, I was very interested in magic.
Hmm.
And I had grown up in a not very religious household, and my own reaction to that was to become very, very religious at a very early age. And
It's like
my
reverse
parents,
rebellion,
yeah,
like
reverse rebellion. If
yeah,
your parents aren't religious at all, then chances are you're going to become religious as a rebellion against that.
yeah.
But my parents were pretty sensible about that, and they said, "All right, well, let's not join a cult. Let's just join um, whatever church has the best music program in town." And when I was a kid, that was the Episcopal Church. And then when I was a teenager, it was the Congregational Church. And then in my late teens and into my early 20s, it was back to the Episcopal Church. And, the Episcopal Church is pretty middle of the road. Believe what you want to believe and just show up.
Hmm.
And there wasn't any real serious expectation about what are you going to do or what are you going to believe. But eventually you sort of wind up leading into the weirder aspects of Christian belief. And sooner or later, you find yourself picking up a grimoire and going, "Oh, this is interesting. What do I do with
Yeah.
this?" And and sooner or later, you realize that there is a fair bit of astrology underlying most historical European magic, and it's really hard to get away with not knowing it.
Hmm.
So sooner or later, you realize, okay, I need to know more astrology than the average book about magic that comes out of Llewellyn Press out in Michigan or Minnesota or wherever it is. You
Hmm.
need more than just that. And you go hunting down books and you find Benjamin Dykes, who has been translating all of the classical and Arabic sources into English.
Hmm.
And before you know it, you're doing readings out of a coffee house and then hanging your shingle out online and saying, "Hey, if you have questions about astrology, I'm here to answer them."
Yeah. Yeah.
But it definitely started with magic. I was doing a lot of solo work based on Golden Dawn texts initially, and in part because that was sort of this alternative Christianity
Hmm.
stuff woven in, and then it turns out not to be that.
Yeah.
Um, but you sort of find yourself exploring a lot of alternative spiritualities within that environment.
Yeah. I mean, the Golden Dawn stuff is very much like Christian Hermetic kind of material. And I remember coming across that as a teenager because I had already been into Wicca and stuff like that, and then thought, well, I'm going to get into the heavy duty stuff, and I picked up the Golden Dawn. I'm like, why is this so Christian? It's very Christian. I thought this would be very different, but it's very Christian,
It's
Yeah.
very Christian, and it's making use of a lot of sources that were cribbed from Christian Kabbalists who were
Mhm.
intent, I mean, absolutely absolutely intent on doing everything that they could to convert every single Jew that they could in all of Europe in the 15 and 1600s to Christianity.
Hmm.
Like that is the primary reason that they learned and adapted and appropriated Kabbalah from Jewish sources and tried to turn it into a Christian system.
Yeah.
And I think it's Dion Fortune, sort of at the turn of the 1900s, who who sort of points out that you don't have to use it in that way, that you can actually use it for your own personal magical development by cribbing from astrology and adding astrology onto the tree of life and not trying to convert Jews to Christianity, but trying to actually understand your own head and your own heart.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that the Golden Dawn is playing off a great deal of that same material that was probably underlying what Dion Fortune was later publishing in the 1930s.
Right. She had her own peculiar spelling for Kabbalah as well, right? Didn't she? Like she
Yeah,
had her
I
own system, so she spelled it differently. I'm trying to
one of
remember what
my
it
magical
was. Yeah.
one of my magical teachers said that a tradition of magic is any three magicians who spell Kabbalah the same way.
Yeah.
In general, I use Kabbalah when I'm referring to the Jewish tradition before 1500 or the continuing Jewish tradition of Kabbalists.
Hmm.
I use Cabala to talk about the Christian Kabbalists who started in the 1500s by appropriating Jewish texts, translating them into Latin, and then trying to evangelize to Jewish communities using Kabbalah. And then Qabalah is the Hermetic Kabbalah, which tends to use a lot more astrological symbolism than
Okay.
Jewish letters.
Right. And that's the one I think Fortune used, right? The
And
Q.
that's the
Yeah.
one that
Yeah.
Fortune uses.
Right. Yeah. Well, I found a lot of value in Dion Fortune's stuff. I enjoy her writings. So, uh,
I I think she's great
yeah.
up to a point. And I
Yeah.
think that the point where she starts to become less valuable is everything above the sphere of the sun, also called Tifereth,
Hmm.
because when you read her stuff about the moon, about Mercury or Hod, or about Netzach or Venus, or Tifereth and the sun, it feels like she's writing from personal experience. She's not telling you I felt this when I experienced this, but she's writing in a way that feels like she's talking from personal experience.
Hmm.
And when she writes about the upper parts of the tree, it feels a little bit like she is describing experiences that other people have told her about, but that she has not had herself.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Your your mileage may vary.
Right. Well, it gets me thinking that that's one of those things you kind of have to struggle with as a writer in general too, is how much of yourself to put in it and how much of your own personal perspective, right? So,
Right.
um, yeah, um, interesting. Yeah, I'd have to revisit her Kabbalistic writings, but um, yeah, nobody's perfect, but she is underrated, I believe. Like, there's a lot of people that just never even read her stuff to begin with that would benefit
She
from
she
it.
is underrated, and she is trying to keep herself out of it to the degree possible.
Yeah.
And there's no question but that the higher experiences of the Tree of Life are really, really difficult to reach. I can't claim to have found my way to those states reliably or successfully, or maybe even at all. But what I can say is that I didn't find her descriptions of those higher realms to be a good map of how to get there. Maybe that's a better way of saying it.
Well, So that's the thing though, is I kind of tend to believe in a lot of magic and mysticism. It's so highly personalized that there is no guidebook that works for everybody, right? Um,
Right.
that's my sense of it anyway, is that it's going to appear differently depending on the person and what it is they need to learn in this go round. Uh,
I think that that's true. I
yeah.
like mystical states are notoriously difficult to achieve
Mhm.
without without a lot of deep intensive work um and at the same time you can sometimes reach mystical states just by walking out your front door and walking around and being in nature and just enjoying the day and being present to the day. And then suddenly you think, oh, I'm having a mystical state. I have to go write a poem about this.
Right.
And then you're like, and then you lose the mystical state, right?
Yeah, then it
That
snaps you out of it. Yep.
I I think it's Margaret Atwood who has a poem about being at work in the very, very bottom of her garden. She's
Mhm.
weeding or something, and a poem suddenly comes to her, and she describes grabbing it by the last word of the poem and running up through the garden and reeling it in like a kite and getting to the kitchen pad and writing the poem down backwards from the last word to the first word. And sometimes it is like that. I can't say I've had that experience precisely, but I have had the experience of having a poem come to me so suddenly that I find it difficult to get it down, and I know that the later lines in the poem are not the ones that were originally there.
Right. Yeah, it's frustrating because you feel like you had it, and then I feel like I've lost them completely sometimes,
And then it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you just can't write them down. And that's well, like that's the transient nature of things, I guess. So
That is the transient nature of things. And
yeah.
the idea of the transient nature of things is a good place to come into the business of astrology that I claim to be in, because astrology is all about the transience of time. That
Mm.
if you don't like current circumstances, wait 2 hours and things might change.
Right.
The joke here in New England is that, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, Astrology or space weather is different enough that you probably need to wait 45 minutes to an hour, but
Mm.
the space weather does change, and it changes at a pretty reliable rate.
Mm.
And part of the reason why it changes at a pretty reliable rate is that the planet is spinning on its own axis. So the stars that are on the eastern horizon are changing at the rate of about 1 degree every 4 minutes.
Okay.
And that speed, 1 degree every 4 minutes, means that Earth is making one cycle on its own axis once every 24 hours or thereabouts, right?
Mm.
Astrologers have known that motion, which, makes it look like the sun comes up in the east and sets in the west for as long as there have been beings that thought of themselves as human beings. Whatever language they called themselves human beings, they said, we look like this, deer look like that, bears look like that. We're this kind of people. This is who we are.
Yeah.
And that motion is so precise that that the people of Plato's time in the 5th and 6th centuries BC called that primary motion.
Mm.
And to give you a sense of just how built into our language that is, at one point I was teaching a 6th grade class, and some girl in the 6th grade class asked this question. She said, um, Mr. Watt, I see that the word of the week this week is counterintuitive. And I love the word, but I can't think of a single example of it happening. Like I understand what the word means, something that goes against your preconceived ideas, but I don't know of a single example of something that is not true.
Hmm.
And I said, okay, well, you know how the sun comes up in the east every morning? And she said, yes. And I said, and how it crosses the sky? Yeah. And how it gets to the high point of the sky around noon? Yeah. And it sets in the west? Yeah. And I said, it doesn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The earth is turning on its axis, and it only looks like the sun is doing that. And all the sun is doing relative to us is staying completely still in the sky.
Hmm.
And the planet turning around its own axis means that sometimes we're looking into deep space and we can see the stars, and sometimes we're facing the sun and all we can see is the sun, and the blue light is the reflected light bouncing against our atmosphere.
Hmm.
But the sun doesn't rise.
Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
And it was a little bit like I had set off a truth bomb in that classroom. The classroom sort of sat there stunned for a moment because they're like, wait, what do you mean the sun doesn't rise? Why is that such a common thing for us to believe? And what does it mean that that's not true? What else
Right.
isn't true?
Yeah, it's so funny how we almost subliminally accept contradictions. And like we know it's not literally true the sun rises, but we'll are happy to say it does because it serves our purposes. But we live with a lot of those things, and all it takes sometimes with people to make the marble drop is to point it out.
Right. I mean, I tell this story in part because in a large enough audience, there's usually one or two adults that haven't thought about it and are,
Mhm.
sitting listening to your podcast going, wait, what the fuck did he just say?
Right, yeah.
And that's good. We want people to think about that an astrologer like myself is prepared to use real science to talk about the way in which the sky screws with us and pretends things are real or not real, and in startling ways. I think that
Yeah.
that's a lot of what I do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because you strike me as an admirer and lover of science as well as the astrology, right? So, I mean, that's something
Sure.
that a lot of people might think is unusual to balance because a lot of scientists would think of astrology as being on the kookier end of things, right?
They not only think that it's kooky, they think that it's outright fraud. And the thing that I love pointing out to people who complain about what I do is I say, look, the work of being an astrologer is half science, naked eye astronomy, and half literary criticism
Hmm.
or literary recombination. And they go, wait, what do you mean by that? And I say, well, it's simple. The Every single position in the sky is associated with some kind of a story.
Hmm.
And planets are actors, and signs, which are not the same thing as constellations, they're sort of abstracted sectors of the sky, are the scenery in which those actors move.
Hmm.
And the houses of astrology are the topics about which those actors are conversing.
Yeah.
So I look at an astrology chart and I'm telling a story based on where the various planets are. And it just so happens to be that the story that I'm telling is about the client who is sitting directly across the table from me or who's on the Zoom screen.
All right.
And there's there's a very different tradition of astrology called Jyotish or Indian astrology. Some people call it Vedic astrology. There's also Western astrology. There's traditional astrology and Hellenistic astrology and Arabic astrology. And everybody, regardless of what systems they use, is pointing at the same light in the sky. And that same light in the sky is Mars or it's Jupiter or
Hmm.
it's Saturn. And it just so happens that we're using its position in the sky relative to where we're standing on Earth to tell a story. And those stories are based on a traditional body of lore that has been carried forward thousands of years to the present day.
Yeah. I mean, I love that description of it, and this is what this is why I love your writing too, is because you're very good at coming up with a metaphor that suits it, right? So, all the sky is a stage. I really like, you
And
know. Uh,
and it was their first, for ancient peoples, it was their first television. It
yeah,
was it was their first methodology for telling stories. What is that star? What does it mean? Oh, well, that when that star is in the sky, it means that it's the bear season, and it could be that we will be visited by bears.
yeah, yeah,
You can build a whole lot off of those kinds of little bits of shorthand over enough tens of thousands of years of looking at the same sky. On the
yeah.
on the other hand, there are times when I get synchronicities that I don't know what to do with,
Mm,
right? And this is the part that's weird magic without having any clarity about why this works. It's really frustrating. Um, I I I was meeting with a friend back in October of last year, and he said, "Yeah, my plan is that I'm going to leave the job that I'm in now, and I'm going to take it easy for a few months and then see about getting a new job." Um, but I want to get a low stress job where I don't have to think nearly as hard as I have for the last 4 months or so, because this
mm,
is just exhausting. And I looked at his chart and I said, that is not what is going to happen. You are going to get an incredibly high powered job offer in late May or early June, and you're going to be working your ass off by the end of July. And it's going to be a job offer that you absolutely feel like you can't turn down.
mm.
And lo and behold, he's now the CEO of the company that hired him. Um,
Wow.
and And I'm not like I was just looking at his chart casually, and for me to be able to make that detailed a prediction, I didn't get the day right, but I got the week right.
Hmm.
And on another occasion, I had a couple come on, and this couple was interested in having a baby. And for a variety of reasons, the baby was not particularly likely to occur.
Hmm.
And I looked at their chart and I said, we're not having this conversation right now. I'm going to turn off the Zoom call and you are going to go to the bedroom. And she said, it's the wrong time of month. He said, it's the wrong time of day. I said, doesn't matter. Go. Baby was born on schedule.
Wow.
um,
That is a dramatic one. Yeah.
that's a dramatic one. And it shouldn't happen, right? I can be skeptical enough of my own abilities to say it had nothing to do with me specifically, and it had everything to do with the fact that in bizarre ways astrology works more often than it doesn't.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that just in terms of tarot. When I've done tarot readings in the past, and it's so I'll say something and not even really know why I'm saying it, just based on reading the card. I'll say it in a certain way, and something will fall, and I'm like, no, this is going to happen, so you got to be careful of this. And then it always does. It's really strange. Cards don't lie, but then I wonder if that's me or if it's the cards or if it's just a coincidence, right?
I mean,
As if just coincidences actually exist. I'm not sure.
I talked about this on one of the What's Magic Is This podcasts, but because I think I was on the show 2 times or maybe 3 times, but it doesn't matter. It's one of them. Um, it could be that the planets are sending out mysterious rays or radiation that somehow affects Earth.
Mm,
It doesn't seem to be gravity, so it must be something that sort of lies outside of our normal detections.
mm,
Or Marsilio Ficino, who was a 15th century polymath and humanist living in and around Florence the early years of the early years of the Renaissance, said that the planets forecast our lives because they are moving on the same invisible waves that we are, but because they're larger than us, we see their actions before the waves reach us, and we can make good predictions about what's going to happen.
Oh, I like that.
Or it could be that the planets are a kind of clock. They tell us what time it is, but they don't they don't govern how the time actually arrives. They just tell us what the time is.
Hmm.
Um, or it could be that Ingo Swann is right. He wrote a book. He first of all, I think he worked for the CIA's remote
Project
viewing
Stargate.
program
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Project Stargate for a while. And he wrote a book called The Psychic Renaissance. And he said that, when he was doing the remote viewing program, they'd basically hand him an envelope with coordinates on the outside of the envelope and a time and say, tell us what's here.
Hmm.
And it could be that most astrologers are simply doing a form of remote viewing with a more complicated set of time space coordinates,
Yeah.
right? Because they've got a mandala, that's the chart itself. They've got the mandala is based on a specific time and a specific geographical location. I did a reading for somebody today who was born in a little town outside of Detroit, for example.
Yeah.
And the fact that she was born in Detroit meant that and was born at a particular time of year that the time zone change is the same as for us to Europe, but she was born uh, in such a way that she's way, way west of Europe, but the time change was the same. And I said, "Is
Hmm.
this right?" And the client was, "Oh, yes, this is absolutely right. That's the right time." Uh, and and as a result, the chart at my own location for the same time and same date is radically different,
Yeah.
right? So it's entirely possible that part of the way that astrology works is as a kind of psychic remote viewing that is based in both time and space.
Hmm. Yeah, this is getting brain bendy now.
It is getting brain bendy. And the fact that there is no obvious mechanism by which astrology could work or should work
Hmm.
raises really deep problems in consciousness because
Hmm.
it shouldn't work, right?
Right.
Because, I read a book from 6,000 years, not 6,000 years ago, but 600 years ago, maybe, or 1,200 years ago. And it says people who have this combination in their chart usually have this kind of job.
Hmm.
And I say to somebody, there's this book from 600 years ago that says that, based on your Venus and Jupiter positions relative to one another, that you probably have a job in art or in graphic design. And they say, why, yes, that's true.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, see, I think it's got to be some combination of all of those explanations is true, right? Like, and we're not meant to know is the thing. Like, if it works, then why bother figuring out why, right? In a way.
Perhaps why perhaps why bother figuring out why? And perhaps it's an unknowable as to
Mhm.
why. And perhaps it's something to experiment with and sit with.
Yeah.
Um, I have another story about this. My uncle used to work for a newspaper now defunct in San Jose, California. He and another guy in the office were tasked every day with writing an astrology column. They each took turns writing six each. And
Hmm.
so they bounced around. Sometimes one of them took evens, one of them took odds. Sometimes they just wrote six in a row. Neither of them had any background in astrology. They found out that one of their colleagues read their column religiously every day and believed deeply in how valuable it was for guiding her life. And they decided to play a trick on her. They wrote into her specific astrology sign, a friend will ask to borrow money from you, and even though it's a large sum of money, you should loan it to them, knowing that you will be paid back.
Hmm.
It was payday. So they each touched her for, $60 or so, which, in the early 1960s was still a lot of money. And they took
Right.
themselves to dinner or lunch at the nicest steakhouse in San Jose. I don't know how nice that was, but the nicest steakhouse in San Jose. And about halfway through their second bottle of wine, they realized, wow, we've done a really nasty thing and we've played a terrible trick on this lady. And now she's going to be out basically 2 weeks worth of groceries. And they resolved to make it up to her and somehow managed to survive without the $60 from their own paychecks. And they found their $60 and they went and they gave her the $60 back of being somewhat hungover. And she said, I know, I read my astrology column. I knew I'd get the money back. And they said, no, 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 we played a trick on you. We borrowed the money from you. We put that into the column today. And she said, I know. I read the astrology column and I knew I'd get my money back.
Wow. Yeah, that feels like the trickster at play there. Yeah.
It
But
feels like the trickster, and it also
yeah.
feels like the the editor of this newspaper knew what he was doing when he picked these two guys, including my uncle, to write the column.
Mhm.
Right? He knew that somehow they had their finger on the pulse of the cosmos and that they'd be able to produce some sort of an astrology column. And I find myself wondering, like, if I didn't spend so much time with the chart, if I actually just tried writing an astrology column without paying much attention to the chart at all, would I give the same results as my uncle and this guy who didn't know anything writing for this San Jose newspaper? Like, what does it take to be a good astrologer? Do you have to really know all of the technicals? I
Hmm.
do. I don't think I could have learned how to be an astrologer without learning all of the technicals and learning how to interpret a chart and studying dozens, if not hundreds of charts over several years.
Yeah.
But maybe it's possible to just sit down and say, okay, I'm Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, and then just write two or three sentences about what's going to happen to each of those signs tomorrow.
Hmm.
Like, is that all there is to it? I don't
Maybe.
know.
Right.
I
Well, I mean, I think sometimes people are just kind of savants without even really knowing it. They just like even just joking around end up coming up with something that
even just joking around,
right.
it might be possible to do something like that and succeed at it. And I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm enough of a professional that I don't dare try at this point,
Right.
um, but I'm aware that the possibility could be there and it might work just as well as what I do. It might even work better.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's just pretty crazy stuff to think about. And when you get into the whys and hows, absolutely, because I was thinking when we were talking about the various ways that astrology might work, um, and the fact that it just seems to anyway. So like the why isn't really something that we can explain. But it reminded me of things like quantum entanglement in science, where you can demonstrate that these particles are connected, and there doesn't seem to be a mechanism through which they're communicating because it's a simultaneous response to the same stimuli. So it's like science has its examples of extreme mystery like that as well. You know.
I'm increasingly I have my speculations about how astrology works,
Mhm.
but I find myself reluctant to decide on an actual scientific explanation. I'm currently reading this book by Michael Pollan called A World Appears, and it's about consciousness research. And apparently back in the 1990s, while you and I were going to poetry readings and early 2000s, these two
Mhm.
researchers, one of them a philosopher and one of them a scientist, made a bet that within 25 years, science would be able to identify specific clusters of neurons in the brain that were the source of consciousness.
Mhm.
And it was the scientist who said, we will find them. It was the philosopher who said, not only will you not find them in 25 years, you won't find them in 50 years.
Right.
And it was the scientist who handed over the case of wine and said, you win, I lose. We are no closer to knowing what those neurons are than we were 25 years ago. We don't even
Mhm.
have a mechanism by which the apparent experience of consciousness happens, much less which specific neurons are involved in that process.
Yeah,
And
because well, I mean, I just my own magical thinking, I don't think it's a matter of neurons, or if it is, they're just one aspect of, well, they're the below in the as above, so below.
they're the
Excuse.
below and the as above, so below.
Yeah.
And when it comes to astrology, I can say, okay, I have learned dozens, if not hundreds, of fact patterns. Mercury plus Jupiter in this combination means this. The Sun and Venus together means this. The Sun opposite Saturn means this. These planets in this part of the sky mean this. These planets in this other part of the sky mean that. I've learned dozens of those fact patterns. And they show up all the time, at least in part because Venus is never more than two signs away from the sun, and Mercury is never more than one sign away from the sun.
Well, in
But
terms of
sometimes it's a matter of intuition, and
yeah,
sometimes it's a matter of this is the historical record that says what this means.
yeah, and finding those patterns and seeing how they're always going to tend to repeat. But I mean, I think that where it comes to consciousness, I mean, there are also researchers I think that consider it more of a field, right? Like a field of consciousness that we're all kind of tapping into. Um, but that makes more sense to me. Is but in that sense, like the would the planets and stars also have their own form of consciousness that emanates through or moves along the same currents?
Right.
Yeah.
Again, I'm reluctant, like there is a spirit model of astrology that, you know, at least some ancient peoples believed that there was either a being
Hmm.
that the planet in the sky was a god,
Hmm.
or that it was the residence or the chariot of a god.
Hmm.
And the assumption was that each chariot of the god had dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of support beings who would come to Earth and influence human beings into what we should do, or how we should behave, or cause us great grief or great trouble. In astrology, the the planet Saturn is called the greater malefic, and Mars is the lesser malefic. And the assumption was that the spirits of those two planets were here to cause you trouble.
Hmm.
Interestingly enough, Jupiter is the greater benefic or good causing planet, and Venus is the lesser benefic or good causing planet. And it would be nice to assume that those planets are here to bring good things your way, but that's not what the ancient texts say. They say that they open the doorway for you to do good things for other people.
Hmm.
It's really unfair.
Right. Well, it's actually kind of nice that it points the way toward how to be good, right? How to do good in the world, and then if everybody um took advantage of that kind of beneficence, we'd all be better off for it.
There's a Latin speaking astrologer by the name of Julius Firmicus Maternus,
Mhm.
who had in chapter one of his book about astrology called Mathesis, Mathesis, translated by Benjamin Dykes relatively recently. Um, at the beginning of book one, he goes through the ethics of being an astrologer. And one of the things he says is, you are a priest of the most high gods, whether you are officially ordained or not. And you have a responsibility to your clients to not try to deceive them or provide them with false information or false hope, or to destroy their spirits by providing dismaying information.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting that there are people in the astrology community who periodically get accused of fraud or deceitful behavior, and there's a code of ethics from very near the beginning of the profession as we understand it, saying, no, you can't do that. You have to
Yeah.
say, here's what the time is, here's what circumstances are arising in your life right now. But the decision of how to react to those has to be yours. I can't tell you what to do. I
Mhm.
can only provide you with some sort of guidance about how this situation arose and when it is likely to be over and when is the best point in it for you to act, but I can't tell you what action to take.
Yeah. I mean, and those sound like pretty solid guidelines to me, and that was something I struggled with back when I did read tarot. Was I was always terrified of saying the wrong thing. Like like saying something that might influence somebody poorly, or that they'll take too literally or something like that. And I really had to take a step back after doing it for a little while, where I said, I gotta come up with some rules for myself to make sure that I'm staying ethical with this, because you could go wrong really easily without even meaning to, let alone the people that do it on purpose to con people, you know.
My wife used to read tarot professionally out of a store, and she finally gave it up because she said too many people came to her specifically in order to ask for permission to do bad things.
Yeah.
Like they were looking for a window or an opportunity to engage in, to start an affair or to screw over a business partner, and they were wondering what was going to happen if they did that. And they wanted a guilt-free mechanism to know whether or not to do that, and tarot cards seemed like a good idea.
Hmm.
And she finally said, "Look, I don't want to tell you that you should sleep with somebody other than your husband. The cards say it's a bad idea. I say it's a bad idea, and you shouldn't do that."
Right.
And the person is like, when is the next tarot reader on duty? I need to ask somebody else.
Right. Well, so and that's kind of uncanny too when people actually do that, because sometimes they'll just keep getting the same answer, and they're like,
I once did a day of reading at a pagan pride day, I think in Western Massachusetts, and my wife and I, then my girlfriend, watched this one woman go fortune teller's stall to fortune teller's stall, asking again and again and again, and coming out disappointed every time. And then she walked over to me, and I was like, "Oh, what's the question?" "Oh, I see. Yeah. Um,
Right.
yeah, the answer is still no."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, it's funny because these are all like the little dramas in our lives that we're always looking for these signs and stuff. And like you said, every position of the stars has its own intended story, and I feel like that's a lot of what comes out in your blog that I absolutely love is you're using a lot of Greek mythology to illustrate the that moment in time and tell us a little story about the characters involved. in the Greek myths to describe it, and it really helps me understand a lot better what these particular positions actually mean.
I think that I think that at one point there was probably an effort to try to map Bible stories onto the sky.
Hmm.
And I don't think that that effort took off or succeeded anywhere near well enough for Christian and Jewish stories to sort of take over the sky. And the result is that most of what we have today is Greek and Roman.
Hmm.
Um, there's definitely some surviving Babylonian lore. There's definitely some surviving Egyptian lore, but even that is kind of colored through a Greco-Roman lens. And and I find it to be endlessly rewarding and enriching to sort of realize every year the sun passes through the same set of 12 stories of the 12 zodiac signs and the 36 stories of the decans. I write my column based on the sun's moving 10 degrees because I
Hmm.
can't write a column every 7 days. I thought about it and I thought I can't do it that fast.
Right.
um, so my column tends to come out around the first of the month, around the 10th of the month, and around the 20th of the month. Sometimes a few days before that, sometimes a day late. It sort of depends on when the sun is going to cross over the line. Um, but there's a story associated with every one of the 12 zodiac signs, and then each zodiac sign is broken down into thirds that are called decans that
Hmm.
are each 10 degrees wide. So there's 36 of them because a circle is 360 degrees around. And then there are other chunks which are called terms or bounds. There are 60 of those, but they don't have the same size.
Hmm.
And uh, and as I think you and I discussed before the show started, there are also 2.5 degree units called dodecs and the dodec of Timoria, and there are
Yeah.
144 of those. And I've sort of been, given that we started talking about poetry to begin with, and that's how you and I first met, I've been writing a poem for each of these subdivisions now for the last 5 or 6 years. And um, I worked it out at one point. There's somewhere around 4,000 lines of poetry in this sequence of poems overall
Wow.
for planets, for decans, for terms, and now for dodecs. That series of poems for the dodecs will be finished in October or November. The poems are all written, but it's taking me forever to type them up, and publish
Right.
them.
Yeah, so that's the Dodecad Moria, which is on your Patreon, right? You have to be a
Right.
Patreon subscriber at the moment to read it. And then, yeah. Um, it sounds like a really cool project and a big endeavor. I guess, the work of actually writing each one is done, but, then rewriting it, presenting it, and putting it on out for people to see is, that's a whole task in itself.
It's a
So,
whole task in and of itself, and it takes a while. And there's now sort of four different versions of the poem. There's the quote unquote final written draft, which is in this purple book that I'm showing to you, but won't be visible to your listeners.
yeah.
And and then there's the copy as I write it on the in a word processing document, and then I copy paste that over to my blog. And usually after I've copy pasted it over to my blog, I'm like, I'm going to change a couple of different words here. And so
Hmm.
all three versions don't match.
Yeah. Oh, and then the plan eventually is to release it as a PDF on your Etsy store, right?
Release it as a PDF, or arrange for self-publishing things through Lulu, or put it up on Amazon as an ebook. It's
Right.
sort of hard to know what to do with it once it exists, right?
Yeah.
Um, Nobody reads poetry, and the number of people who go to poetry readings in order to listen to astrology poetry is pretty small.
Right. Well, but that's where I think, as niche as it might be, there should be a market for it just because you can follow along with the Dodex and read them as you go, I would assume. Or like
You
at the
can
moment you
follow
can because you're posting them, but
you can follow along with them year to year. And
yeah,
I'm very conscious that the astrology poetry that I write is kind of not for just now.
yeah.
I mean, Benjamin Dykes has successfully translated um, 10 or 12 classical astrological texts from the ancient world and from the Arabic era, sort of first century BC up through about the ninth century. And then he did a bunch of works in Latin from the 14 and 1500s.
Mhm.
And those books are still useful to astrologers today because the fact patterns, the yokes that they describe, YOKES, are are still relevant and useful and still turn out to be easy ways of making predictions about people's lives.
Mm.
And I'm sort of avoiding specific examples because I don't want anybody to listen to their show and go, "Oh my God, I have that combination. What does that mean? Oh, that's a
Right.
divorce. Shit. What
Yeah.
do I don't want to
Yeah.
I don't want to go too deeply into what those things might be and give specific examples. But what I am interested in is the fact that those texts are still useful hundreds and hundreds of years after they were written, and maybe my poetry will be too. There's
Mhm.
always within the poet's mind, are they still going to be reading me 50 years from now or 100 years from now? And if I'm going to be providing some kind of psychological insight into people's lives 1,000 years from now, great. Astrology poetry is a good way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
it's it's part of my immortality spell.
yeah, yeah. Uh, well, there's the old Shelley poem, look upon my works and weep, like, but the opposite often
Your
is true too, right? You know, um, uh, sometimes people get recognition much, much later on and other people are forgotten entirely, so who knows why that happens?
other people are other people are forgotten entirely, and notice how few poems survive the long march of years. I mean, Shelley must have written dozens, if not hundreds, of poems in his career, and Ozymandias is pretty much the only one that anybody actually knows.
Yeah.
And in a few hundred years, it might be the only poem of his that survives. Um, Homer is another great example. There's this new movie out about by Christopher Nolan of the Odyssey, and as near as we can tell, there were originally 26 books or epic poems associated with the telling of the Trojan War.
Hmm.
And only two of them survive, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the rest are lost. They may be available in some small fragments here and there, but we don't even know what the titles of the epics they came from are. But they're poems that happen to have some of the same formatting and some of the same textual elements. So they might be fragments of lost parts of the Iliad and the Odyssey, or they might belong to one of the other 12 epics that are believed to have existed.
Hmm.
Like time swallows literature like a dragon.
Hmm.
And the fact that there are pieces of astrology that I know that I can point to and I can say this is about 2600 years old, and that the knowledge of how to do this particular calculation has existed for 2600 years and people still find it useful today. That's weird,
Yeah.
right? that somebody thought this was useful enough to write it down around 600 BC, and that it has continued to be useful to astrologers thousands of years later, nearly
Hmm.
3,000 years later.
Hmm. Well, I tend to think it's weird with a Y, as though is destined
It's
to
it's weird with a
survive.
Y.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird with a Y.
Yeah. Uh, some of these things are meant to be passed down and affect us still to this day. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's crazy to think about. Crazy to think about all this stuff. Now, in on that note, here's one thing I am really interested in. When people talk about not personal horoscopes, but horoscopes for something as big as a nation or the world, or seeing repeated patterns of astrological alignments that only happen every, say, 250 years. Um, and I know you do write about this as well. So, what's kind of your take on that, and kind of where we're at as a world at the moment?
So there's sort of four basic types of astrology, right?
Mm,
There's natal astrology, which is the one that everybody knows, looking at your birth chart and trying to interpret what's going to happen in your life based on what the sky was doing at the moment that you were born. There's also uh, what's called horary astrology, Horary, horary astrology, or uh, electional astrology. And that is if you have a question and you come to me as an astrologer and you say, hey, what's the answer to this question? In theory, I can look at the sky at that exact moment and give you an answer and tell you something about that particular moment. And
mm,
so horary um is you say, you know, should I sleep with my boss's wife? And I personally am going to tell you no, but uh but when I look at the astrology might in fact say yes.
yeah.
Um and and maybe there are good reasons for that, maybe there are bad reasons for that, but the answer could to that question in that exact moment might be yes. That's horary astrology. The other side of horary is called electional astrology, and that's when you say, hey, I noticed that there's this really cool conjunction happening on this particular date. I am going to do something that is at exactly the same time as that really cool astrological alignment in order to give my action a boost from that astrological alignment.
Hmm.
There's a there's a particularly high art to doing that, which is called a talismanic election, where you aren't simply doing a mundane action like dropping a letter into a letterbox to apply for a job,
Hmm.
but that you are actually um, manufacturing the letter or a metal object to be a magical charm of that particular moment in time.
Hmm.
The thing that you're talking about, though, is called mundane or judicial astrology. And mundane or judicial astrology is nations, um, states, counties, cities, and organizations.
Hmm.
And a couple of years ago, for I think Worcester Magazine, I did a piece for Halloween about the upcoming election in Worcester, who was going to win the election. And I said, I can't tell you who's going to win the election, but I can tell you what problems the incoming mayor is likely to face based on the moment of the election.
Hmm.
And in the follow up conversations with the people who commissioned that article, it sounds like I was way off base. So,
Ah,
you take you you pay your money, you take your chances. But
yeah.
I didn't know anything about Worcester politics at the time, and I wasn't in a good position to give a good prediction. So chalk it up to a learning experience. So
Yeah.
that's the basic outline of what we're talking about for readers who or listeners who don't know anything about this. So in terms of what's actually happening on the judicial or mundane front, there's sort of three big things that have happened relatively recently and that have very long lasting effects. The first of them is that Pluto moved into Aquarius and will be in Aquarius for about the next 19 to 20 years. The last time that Pluto was in Aquarius was in 1778, 79, just sort of a couple of years into the American Revolution, but before everybody in the US was on board with fighting a revolution, and didn't end until after Napoleon had fallen from power.
Hmm.
So there is if you think about Pluto and Aquarius as signaling enormous popular discontent with the existing political regime that runs the United States
Hmm.
or runs America, North America as a continent, or that is deeply dissatisfied with political norms in general, where an aristocracy decides and the people just have to go along with it. We are right on track,
Hmm.
right? We have a very large elite population, which is largely out of touch with what ordinary Americans want. Um, More than 70% of Americans have to be on board with a specific course of action before Congress will decide to act on that particular idea.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes they won't even act on it even then. I mean, the idea of Medicare for all seems to be popular with more than 70% of the country, and we still can't get that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, the second thing that's happened is that Neptune has moved into Aries, and Neptune will be in Aries for about 13 years. And the last time that Neptune was in Aries uh, for a similar amount of time was the start. I'm not sure I'm going to get this right. I'm not going to get this right, so I'm not going to go there. But Neptune was discovered in 1846. And it was just as early forms of photography were coming into existence. And it was just as mass market books started to reach large audiences. And and Neptune has always been associated with mass um, mass media of various kinds. Fiction, magazines, storytelling on a grand scale, television, film, all have Neptunian overtones.
Hmm.
So we're at the sort of start of a new era of how people think of themselves and what kinds of media stories we're interested in telling. When Neptune has been in Pisces, which has been sort of the last 12 or 13 years, nearly everybody thinks of themselves as a mystic or as a religious experientialer of some kind.
Hmm.
And when Neptune is in Aries, a lot more people think of themselves as soldiers and warriors. And I think that that's not necessarily a great thing given what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah. I'd go as far as to say that's a bad thing.
It may, in fact, be a very bad thing that people are playing at being warriors who have no idea what it means to actually be a soldier or a warrior. The third thing that's going on is that Uranus has moved into Gemini. And the last time that Uranus moved into Gemini was the day that Fort Sumter surrendered in 1861 to the Confederacy. And
Hmm.
the time before that was the American Revolution. So we have the three largest and most invisible to the naked eye big planets, um, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, which are not visible to the naked eye, have changed signs for the first time. They're in a long while. They're going to be in the signs that they are in for a long while. And they have been strongly associated with eras in which the country dramatically takes sides. Um, Pluto represents the poor against the rich, or the working class against the rich, or the working class against the leadership. Neptune represents new visual forms of entertainment, new kinds of propaganda, and new personal visions for people. And Uranus has represented the country divided against itself.
Hmm.
These conditions are likely to last for a while. And learning how to navigate both the personal and national and state level disruptions that they're likely to bring is kind of your business for the next 8 to 20 years before those things really are going to change. Um, that said, you look at Uranus in Gemini, and Uranus will be in Gemini for about 7.5 years more. And the first 4 years of that, at the time of the Civil War and at the time of the American Revolution, were terrible for ordinary Americans. And they were
Yeah.
great for the second 4 years, right? That America went from being in the middle of a war in both cases to ordinary Americans becoming considerably more prosperous and more capable and more able to travel and more able to have leisure time. Um, it didn't last, but there was an initial burst of prosperity for a lot more people and a lot more freedom for a lot more people in the 4 years immediately after the American Civil War and after the American Revolution.
Hmm.
So my hope is another 2.5 to 3 years of chaos. Gee, you'll notice what that aligns with if you're reading between the lines.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's likely to be a dramatic improvement for about another 4 years, and then there'll be another phase shift. I don't think, even though I hate artificial intelligence, or I hate what we're claiming is artificial intelligence and large language models, even though I hate it, I think that it will be another 12 to 13 years before the both the problems and the opportunities that it represents are really going to shake out and we understand what we are actually building. It doesn't mean that we're not in for a really chaotic economic ride, because the systems that we've built are too expensive and don't last long enough
Hmm.
and don't generate enough revenue to pay for themselves.
Right.
So that's a financial collapse.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they call a bubble, I think.
That is what they call a bubble. Is some, um, but I just recently listened to Cory Doctorow and John Stewart talking about this, and Cory Doctorow invoked John Kenneth Galbraith, who wrote a book called The Crash of 1929, to try to explain and understand to audiences in the 1930s and 40s what had happened that caused the Great Depression. And John Kenneth Galbraith's line was, the market can stay solvent longer than you can avoid bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So you and I cannot bet on when the bubble will collapse, because the market can remain solvent longer than you and I can avoid bankruptcy. It would be nice if I could tell you, oh, yes, astrology can predict to the day and hour when Bitcoin will finally go away. And it doesn't work like that, unfortunately. Um, but I think that a lot of these systems have to collapse, but I think they're going to go on longer than we think they are,
Oh yeah. Yeah,
simply because
they'll go
there's
on just out of
inconceivable
spite.
amounts of money sloshing around in them.
Right. But I think that's what I see in the world these days is a lot more people perhaps than ever before, are starting to see through the artifice of what a lot of this actually is. As far as like the Neptunian aspect of it and what we're being told, the story that's spun around AI and all of that, um, even the fact that they call it AI is propaganda and salesmanship. But I think people are starting to see through it more now, and of course, people are more distrustful in general of all kinds of narratives. So, and when you look at economics more broadly, it's all based on speculation and what people think might happen, you know? So, so I mean, it's hard to guess when something's going to happen when the people that hold the levers that decide when that's going to happen can do it at a whim or not at all, right?
There's there's an enormous amount of money sloshing around in the system. A friend of
Mm,
mine explained it that the big pension funds and the big hedge funds are enormous cruise liners trying to pull into tiny little ports in some beautiful sun-drenched Caribbean island.
mm,
And they have to make 4 or 5 turns around the market before they can get to the pier and unload their folks. And everybody on the corniche, on the walkway in front of the port knows that in an hour or an hour and a half there's going to be 5,000 tourists and that they can jack the prices up of everything on the that's on sale by a factor of 10, and that the tourists who are getting off the ship uh can pay those prices. And and when the cruise ship leaves, prices are going to drop precipitously back to what ordinary islanders can afford.
mm,
And here you are in your one little speedboat zipping around the harbor,
mm,
trying to land ahead of these big cruise ships and get a deal before everybody else raises their prices.
yeah,
And that's what it's like to operate in the market. Is you are always in trying to make the same moves as those big cruise ships, but before they do.
yeah. Which, is easy to do when you're the one making the decisions that that are gonna cause a predictable reaction. Yeah,
Yes, and you also have to remember the market will stay solvent a lot longer than you can avoid bankruptcy.
right, right. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Well,
Coming back to those 3 planets, and this may be a good place to wrap it up.
yeah,
There are going to be disruptions in economics, in politics, in society, in culture that are going to be much vaster than you as an individual can handle for the next 2 decades. You can't stabilize it by yourself. You can't fix it by yourself. And getting mad at your computer screen by yourself is a recipe for insanity.
hmm,
You need to get out of the house. You need to find the communities that you care about. You have to make partnerships, even with some people that you don't like. I'm not saying you have to make peace with the whack jobs who think that the apocalypse is around the corner, uh, or who want to hunt down trans people in your neighborhood. Like, I'm not saying you have to make peace with the crazies, but you do have to find a way to make and build regular, ordinary community and know who some of your neighbors are, because shit is going to be crazy for a while, at least according to the norms of astrology. And it's likely to be crazy for the rest of this decade and most of the next.
yeah,
There are some bright spots, and there are some moments for personal success and economic opportunity, and even culturally awesome things that we're all going to want to participate in, and that's great. But the world that you thought of as normal is not coming back.
Hmm.
We have to build something new on the other side of the next 2 decades of confusion. And I think that's the thing to be focused on, is that you cannot build that sitting at your computer worrying about what's happening on social media.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
those are
guess
seeds
that's
we
the best
have
thing that I
to,
can say as an astrologer.
right. Those are seeds we should plant now, right? Like, so that
Right.
we can get the fruit in 20 years, you know? Yeah.
Listen to weird podcasts like the AP Strange Show and What Magic Is This, and go out and find your people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That actually is a really great way to wrap this up. But this has been an absolute joy, Andrew. I'm so glad that we connected and were able to talk today. Um, where can people find you online?
So the best place to find me is at andrewbwatt.com, and I have a little box in the upper right hand corner that says how to find me on Facebook and Twitter and Blue Sky and a bunch of other websites. I don't visit Twitter anymore. It's turned into too much of a political hot mess, and I can't be bothered.
Yeah, same
Um,
here.
but um, but my own website is the best place to reach me. And in the bar across the top, there's a line that says contact services, and click there, and you can send me an email directly through that.
Excellent. All right. Well, like I said, it was really great to have you on. I'm glad the stars aligned properly for
I'm glad too. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for
yeah.
having me on.
Well, we'll have to do it again sometime. So until then, take care of yourself and listeners, go find your people.
Go find your people. Have a
Yeah.
good night, all.